The Arab came nowadays. Mama did Mama made
chat box no সেইবিলাকতো নাজানো একটা chat box আছে কোড chat box মোৰ কিছু
Chat.
তার পাছত হেৰিটো surveillance tactics আমাকো দেখিব দুটা তোমাৰ অডিওটো আমাৰ অডিওটো কেনেকৈ
삐뚤삐뚤삐뚤삐뚤삐뚤삐뚤 삐뚤구나 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 삐뚤구나
वो वीडियो वाला वो रेड वाला हटा देना
वो पढ़े ना नवरन तक क्या ना पढ़े हाँ got it ठीक है thank you পূৰ্বলৈ ভিডিঅ'ত আছে।
আহকচোন 1 মিনিট।
कौन है पहला?
হিন্দু নহয় মই তই হেৰি হৈ আছ তই লুকাই আছ
Abo, saya kon. Itu apa lagi? Jar. Hah? Kadilah. Charging kori aছো। Oh,
ঘুমাবা নেকি?
Thank you, thank you. সোমায়ে গাৰ্গীক দেখিছো। আচ্ছা, চব আছে না? হেল্ল'। ঠিক আছে, sure. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. We'll be starting in another 8 minutes. I'd request all the participants to mute their audio.
Mama. দেখা যাবে না সেটা
Stop video.
Start korilo. Namaskar and a warm welcome to everyone. On behalf of K.C.Das Commerce College, I thank you for joining this virtual webinar on teaching in the digital age. As teachers, we all agree that teaching is as central to higher education today as it has been for generations. As it has been for generations. But for all of us who are mostly used to the conventional chalk and talk method of teaching, we would surely agree that teaching in a digital age is certainly different. Today's topic sounds interesting, and we look forward in having a fruitful session ahead. Well, without wasting much time, may I now request the inaugurator of today's event, Dr. Rishikesh Borwa, Principal K.C.Das Commerce College, to deliver his inaugural speech. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Bora. Am I audible to all?
Yes, sir.
Well, respected speaker of today's webinar, Mr. Avinash Borua, who is presently working as the project lead data and management information in the Open University of United Kingdom. Esteemed colleagues from K.C.Das Commerce College as well as from other institutions. Namaskar. A very good morning to Mr. Borua and good afternoon to all others. Well, at the very outset, on behalf of K.C.Das Commerce College, I welcome all of you to this virtual arena where we will be enlightened on the theme Teaching in a Digital Age by our invited resource person. Well, this is our third webinar during this lockdown period. I'm happy to know that Mr. Avinash Barua has 169 citations, 6 H-index and 5 I-10 index to his credit. And he has been honored by the Open University Research Excellence Award for Outstanding Impact on Teaching, Curriculum, and Students category. That's really wonderful. Congratulations to Mr. Borua once again. Well, coming to reality, as on today, a little while back, I just looked at the TV to know what is the present status of COVID-19 pandemic. And what I see is that worldwide, as of now, more than 60 lakhs people are being affected, 3.66 lakhs dead, and in India, 1.73 lakhs affected, 4980 dead, and here in our Assam, 1,057 persons are affected. Well, the gravity of the situation need not be explained, as all of us are aware of it. Luckily for us, the death rate is very minimal. And I hope and I pray to God that the herd immunity is developed at the earliest till every one of us have access to the vaccine. Dear colleagues, apart from coronavirus, right at this moment, we are also being affected by floods, cyclones, earthquakes, and even locust attacks. Well, human interference with nature is responsible for many hazards like this that transform into a disaster. But then this is how life is. We appreciate a rose plant, don't we? We appreciate a rose plant because of its beautiful flowers and not the thorns. But then when you look at the rose plant, flowers are few, but thorns are many, isn't it? So that way life has also got a lot of thorns or obstacles. We need to have positivity and an urge to overcome these obstacles. More the chaos, more is the probability of creation. Being a student of nature, that's what I believe. Well, during this lockdown has compelled us to learn and activate some gadgets which were already there with us, but seldom used. In this digital age, application and use of technologies is a must. And this is going to be the new normal. One cannot complain that he or she is not acquainted with these techniques. We are teachers, and as such, we need to have command over the medium through which we are disseminating the capsules of knowledge. Tomorrow, we will win over COVID-19, but that does not mean that life will again be back to the way it was in the old days. More pandemics are waiting to happen. Believe me, more pandemics are waiting to happen if we do not mend our ways and stop interfering with different ecosystems. So it is the most appropriate time to learn about different techniques and develop our skills. And the present webinar, which is being organized by IQAC K.C.Das Commerce College, is one such step in this direction. So I thank Team IQAC of K.C.Das Commerce College for organizing this webinar, and I am pretty sure that it will be a very good learning experience for all of us. Thank you all once again. Thank you so much. Over to Madam Bora.
Thank you so much, sir. Before I hand over the session to our esteemed speaker, I'd like to take the privilege of inviting him to our August gathering. I take pride in sharing that Mr. Avinash Borua is an alumni of K.C.Das Commerce College. He can be said to be a hybrid between a senior project manager, a business analyst, a strategic transformation lead, and a product development manager with expertise in analytics, evaluation, ethics, strategy, product development, program and project management, stakeholder management, benefits management, and risk management, together with a background in training and development. He is presently working as the project lead, data and management information in the Open University situated in Milton Keynes in the United Kingdom. He obtained his BCom degree with a specialization in management, followed by a master's in business administration from the University of Strathclyde. While his dissertation was in strategy, his electives were program and project management, project risk analysis and management, and leadership. Mr. Borua has over 7 years' experience of program and project management, with the last 4 in change management and digital transformation. He is experienced in using various project management methodologies, including Agile, Prince2, etc., to manage projects and in delivering outcomes and benefits that aligns to institutional strategic objectives. As project lead, he leads a team that is involved in piloting predictive analytics to help the Open University understand how best to use this data to provide personalized support to students and thereby improve retention. For the last 4 years, he has been working on numerous strategic projects aimed at helping the staff at the Open University to embrace learning analytics with a view to facilitate cultural and operational change. He has helped develop the Open University's policy on the ethical use of student data for learning analytics, arguably the first of its kind in higher education worldwide. He has around 15 publications and conference papers with 169 citations, 6 H index and 5 I-10 index to his credit. He has been honored with the Open University Research Excellence Award for outstanding impact on teaching, curriculum, and students category. At such an early age, he has had the privilege of working with the Open University, United Kingdom, KU UK, and IIT and Genpact New Delhi, and even Bajaj Allianz Shillong. In his free time, analyzes his interest into cricket, wildlife photography, and building model aircrafts. So this is in brief about Avinash. So before we get started, I would like to request our participants to type their questions in the chat box during the course of the webinar. We would bring them during the interactive session towards the end. I would also like to request them to type their names and email in the chat box during the course of the webinar for record of attendance. Now, over to you, Avinash.
Thank you. Before I start,
yeah, I just hand over the host to you, Avinash.
Yes.
Just a while. Yes, Avinash, you can start.
Thank you very much. First off, I'm quite embarrassed at being introduced in such a way. I mean, Anjita ma'am, you forgot to mention that I'm human, but at the same time, I'm really honored to be speaking to you, and hopefully, I'll be able to share my expertise and help you in your journey in teaching in the digital age. So before I start, can I just ask everybody whether they can see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. Could I request everybody to put themselves on mute, and if possible, just to save bandwidth as well, to actually turn off your videos as well, so that the key thing that we need we can focus on, which is the presentation. And before I go into the presentation itself, I just want to set up a few housekeeping rules. First off, I'm planning to spend about 40 minutes. I'm going to cover the content in about 20 slides. There will be 10 minutes for questions at the end. As Anjita ma'am and I've mentioned earlier, let's put our microphones on mute. However, if you have any burning questions, please use the raise hand function to stop me, and we can answer the questions. But more importantly, I'm here to share a few ideas which you would need to implement in your normal. Sorry, bear with me a second. So I've just received notification that there are a few people who are awaiting admission. Right, moving on. I would respectfully request you to keep an open mind. mainly because these might be ideas either you are familiar with, and I might be going over it, and it might be a case of me trying to teach a grandmother to suck eggs. But at the same time, there might be new ideas that you would like to try in your own practice. So moving on, can everybody see the next slide?
Yes, everyone can see, I believe.
Okay.
You can continue, Mr.
Okay,
Barra.
so the plans of the session, as I've meant to go ahead, was that we would be, first I'd like to talk to you about the challenges of switching to online delivery. And then we'll talk about how we need to understand the student's context, how we can use technology to support delivery. I'll talk to you about a few different models of how the content and learning is delivered online. And then I'll talk to you about potentially the need for using frameworks to scaffold your practice around. And this will become clearer as we go ahead. So first off, in the chat room, could you please tell me how the switch to online delivery has made you feel? Number one, if you're starting to panic. Number two, if you think you're drowning. Number three, if you're feeling motivated. And number four, you're actually feeling joyful and you're actually enthusiastic about it. So if you could use the chat box. Okay, 3, Deep Jyoti. Okay, so most people are 4. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Some majority of you are feeling demotivated, and it's not surprising. So I'm going to move on now, but thank you for your responses. This hopefully these next few slides you'll be able to identify the reasons why you're feeling demotivated with switching to online delivery. I suppose the biggest challenge is connectivity. And we have no control over the connectivity our learners have access to. Sorry, could I ask whoever's got themselves not on mute, put themselves on mute, please.
I think Dr. Deepjyoti Deka is not in mute. Dr. Deepjyoti Deka, you please mute yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So the first challenge is connectivity, because we have no control over how many what devices our students are using, indeed what mobile connection they have. They might be in a remote area or living in a shadow area, for example, where they don't have mobile coverage. Next, the technology itself. So whether it is the use of Skype, whether it is the use of Zoom, whether it's the use of any other technology, that itself can be a challenge, not only to the students themselves, but also to teachers. Because we are not used to using technology to deliver learning, especially when we're in a chalk and talk environment. Thirdly, digital literacy itself. So whether it is our students or whether it is our teachers, we need to acknowledge our levels of digital literacy and acknowledge that we probably need to do a lot more to improve our digital literacy skills. Next, in an online environment such as this one, there are no visual cues. So you can't see whether the person has understood what you're talking about, whether they are getting bored of what you're saying, and that can be quite a big challenge. So how do you build interactivity in an online environment? There's also the challenge that students themselves sitting at home using technology to access learning will feel isolated. So how do you keep that student engaged? Then there's the question of the teacher being invisible. We are used to, in a chalk and talk environment, having the teacher at the front of the class speaking to the students. In an online environment, very often you will find yourself being invisible as the teacher. So the challenge of making your presence known and felt is a very real one. There's also a challenge on how you give feedback to your students as well. In a face-to-face environment, when you're giving them feedback, you have access to not only what you are saying, but also your facial expressions and your body language, which helps the student understand what you're trying to say, and hopefully the message goes in the right way. In an online scenario, the only thing that you have is your communication skills. The other intrinsic skills or intrinsic things that we take for granted are missing, like your body language, your ability to read whether the student is being upset by what you're saying. So bearing in mind that providing feedback is quite challenging online. And of course, the quality of teaching resources. In an online environment, the quality of teaching resources you have access to, you probably have access to better teaching resources, but how do you decide what teaching resources should you use that will enable you to explain the content that you're teaching in the best way? For the next challenge is the volume of work. So in a face-to-face situation, especially colleagues or esteemed participants who have years of experience teaching, the lesson plan may come to you naturally because you've delivered it several times. It's tried and tested, and there is nothing that you need to worry about. You can answer all the questions. You have prepared for all eventualities because your method of delivery has been tried and tested. But in an online environment, I'll give you an example of one of my friends who teaches at Maria's school in Guwahati. They have recently moved to teaching students in class 11 online. The biggest challenge that she found was she was going over the time limit. So she was using the free version of Zoom. So she was using the 40-minute sessions. And she was going over the time limit because, one, she was helping her students get used to the technology. So most of the time was spent admitting people into rooms or spent helping students understand how to use the technology. Second, she found that the lesson plan that she had in mind, which worked in a face-to-face delivery situation, just didn't work in an online delivery situation because of the reasons that I've mentioned before. You can't read the body language of the students. You can't. There is no instant feedback. What happens then is that what she's found is that she's had to work really hard to create additional examples of the examples to be able to explain to her students what in detail the topics, because in a face-to-face situation, in most cases, teachers pitch to the middle level in terms of you're not pitching to the most intelligent students and you're not pitching to the most vulnerable students. You're pitching somewhere in the middle, hoping that the students who are more intelligent will understand and will carry on. The students who need more help will raise their hands and ask for help. But in an online scenario, you have to prepare for all those eventualities and prepare your lesson in such a way that you cater to the student that requires the most support. I don't know whether referencing is a major challenge in Indian universities, but definitely in the UK, one of the things that is a big challenge is getting students to understand the need to reference. What you would find increasingly also is that alongside the volume of work, you would also find yourself in demand, especially during the time the assessments become due. That's when the students will be contacting you on an ongoing basis. Now, in the open university setting, teachers sometimes feel inundated with emails, texts, phone calls from students, especially leading up to the assignment, mainly because students are working in their own time, and that there have been conversations I have had with tutors and teachers in the Open University who say, I can't believe that student sent me an email at 1 o'clock in the morning. What do they think? Do they expect me to respond at 1 o'clock in the morning? But the reality is that probably that's the time they have to study, and they might actually appreciate a response as soon as possible. Another thing to keep in mind. And then finally, the expert's blind spot. I'm sure most of you are already, practitioners, you are teachers, so I don't need to talk too much about the expert's blind spot. However, the expert's blind spot becomes even more in focus when you're teaching online, because even in my own experience, you tend to have the feeling of, oh my God, I've explained this topic in 3 different ways to the student. Why doesn't the student understand what I'm trying to say? That brings us to the differences between online delivery and chalk and talk. The key difference between online delivery and chalk and talk is that in a chalk and talk environment, you have something that you can control, your teaching, or in effect, your behavior. Because you can read the situation and go, you know what, I don't think the students have understood what I have said today. I will try another way of explaining it. That's very difficult to do in an online scenario. In the chalk and talk environment, you are the expert in the room who is imparting the knowledge. And that's obviously the challenge is that you have to be imparting the correct knowledge. However, you have control over the knowledge you are imparting. In an online environment, you need to view yourself as the subject matter expert, where you will be the person who knows the subject matter in and out, but you may not be the best person who knows how to deliver the learning. And I suspect the emotional responses that we recorded earlier of actually being demotivated may be coming from that perspective, essentially. But if you acknowledge the fact that your expertise is the subject matter, and then what skills you have to gather is how do I learn how to deliver my expertise in an online environment, that would be probably what would help decrease that demotivation or increase your motivation. Any questions so far? Okay. So what skills or considerations do you need to have in mind when delivering online? First and foremost, communication skills. Clear, concise instructions, clarity of thought, to be able to communicate that in an online environment. Secondly, technological literacy, but the focus is not just on your technological literacy, it's also how do you enable students to be technologically literate. So in the example that I was using of my friend Sarah, who teaches in Mario School in Guwahati, the first session that she had on Zoom, when I was talking to her in hindsight, what could you have done better? So she said, instead of actually focusing on the teaching in that first session on Zoom, I should have just talked about how do we use Zoom to learn. So that everybody is learning at the same time and you've got a set of skills established before you can then focus on learning the content. So the challenge, again, back to you, is that the challenge will be firstly, what technology do you choose to teach? Secondly, how do you then bring the students up to speed with the technology so that the technology doesn't become a barrier and it becomes an enabler around discourse and learning? Third, you might want to think about how you assess and evaluate. So you might want to change assessment strategies, your evaluation strategies, because you're teaching online. And I'll come to that in a minute, but I'm just going to let that sit for the moment. The next two, compassion and empathy, and patience. I'm sure as students, as teachers, you have oodles of compassion, empathy, and patience with your students. But believe me, in an online environment, you probably need triple of what you already have. Because it can be frustrating, especially when that student has sent you an email at 3 o'clock in the morning asking for an explanation of a particular subject or a topic. The next thing that you need to think about, consider yourselves the subject matter experts rather than the teaching experts. And there is a distinction, which I was talking about in the earlier slide, because in a face-to-face environment, you control how you teach. But in an online environment, you do not have control of how your students learn, because you don't have that instant feedback, the face-to-face nature of the interaction where you are able to read the body language. So think about how you can be the expert that students refer to, rather than being the person who's imparting the knowledge. It's a slight shift in terms of thinking. One key aspect is time management. So, as I mentioned earlier, your volume of work in the initial onset might feel like it has increased, mainly because you have to plan more. But not only do you have to plan for the most the weakest students, so to speak, you also have to plan in such a way that you are able to manage the session as well as possible, especially if you're using instances of free, let's say you're using the free Zoom 40-minute sessions. Zoom allows only 40 minutes for you to use a video conferencing facility if you're not buying the license, which means that you need to plan your time in such a way that you manage to complete exactly what you want to do, but also are prepared for eventualities. So your lesson planning becomes more and more critical. So I did mention earlier about the difference between what to teach and how to teach. So being the subject matter expert and knowing your stuff about, let's say, physics, geography, accountancy is fine. but knowing how to deliver the content and deliver the content to the required learning objectives is where instructional design knowledge and capabilities come in. This is something that you can start, or you would need to consider how, not only as an individual, but as a collective, as institutions, you start looking at what your design approach will be to design your content. You have no control over the syllabus, but you still have control over the content that you can deliver. Next point is that the teaching must be accurate right from the start. Again, this goes back to planning, making sure you have the right examples in place. So if example 1 doesn't work, I have example 2, 3, and 4 to fall back on. And I have planned my time in such a way that I am taking into account all these eventualities. And if I don't have to use example 2 and 3, I have extra time to go over some of the topics. But you need to break it down and plan the sessions using the learning objectives for that session. The challenge to making online learning interesting is personal. Is how do you engage the students? And here you need to think about balancing how you cover the content and actually introducing your own teaching personality into it. So your own teaching style, but there has to be a balance. And finally, and I'll come to this in my next few slides, you need to think about making the content easily accessible as possible. Okay, I've got a couple of colleagues who have raised their hands. Happy to take any questions if you want. Any questions? Okay. Just feel free to stop me if you have any questions and we can pick them up as we go along. So I was talking about making content as easily accessible as possible. So think about the fact that there might be a student in your class who is traveling from Jagi Road using the Kolong Express to come into Guwahati, and potentially there's a scenario where they were studying in K.C.Das Commerce College. Hello? Yeah.
তোমাৰ বহুত participants এখানে লগ ইন কৰিবলৈ বিচাৰি আছে, তুমি সিহঁতক just allow কৰি দিয়া, আৰু তুমি questions সুধিবলৈ হ'লে you have to unmute them.
Okay.
তোমাৰ হাততহে আছে গোটেই controlটো.
Okay, good.
I have been raising my hand, you have to keep them. তুমি just সিহঁতক allow কৰি দিয়া participants খিনি.
Okay.
Okay.
Apologies. I didn't realize that there were colleagues who were looking to join the session. So before I move on, can I just check if there are any other questions? Okay, so Upasna asked, is it possible to make only online delivery of teaching? And can that become a sustainable solution to impart education for all? Can I answer that question after I cover the next slide? Is that okay, Upasna? Because what Upasna has asked is related to understanding the student's context.
Yeah. Definitely, sir.
Sure. I'm sorry. Just call me Avinash. Sorry, my father is not me. So before I answer Upasna's question and talk about understanding the student's context, I just wanted us to reflect on these three concepts: equality, equity, and justice. And justice in this context is in the context of social justice. So first and foremost, equality is the belief that everybody needs to have access to the same thing. But in the picture, as you can see, we are giving everybody access to the same thing, which is one box. But everybody's needs are not the same. So the shortest person is still not being able to see up over the fence and watch the football game. In the concept of justice or social justice, we are moving towards removing the systemic barrier, in which in this case was the wooden fence. And we have a fence that people can see through, so everybody can see the football game. However, if you're in a situation where you can't remove the systemic barrier, then you need to consider the concept of equity, which is that everybody needs to get the support that they require. And can I just, with a show of hands, ask, not show of hands, sorry, using your chat box, could you say which one do you think you as a teacher can strive towards? Equality, equity, or justice? Thank you, Deep Jyoti. Thank you, everyone. So most of the responses are towards equity and some of the responses towards justice. I would agree with colleagues who have said equity, mainly because justice is something that you may not be able to deliver, because the systemic barrier needs to overcome sometimes big challenges that you yourself in your teaching environment may not be able to deliver. Mr. Decker, you had raised your hand. Okay. So coming back to understanding your students' context. Why not equality? Okay. I'm going to go back to that previous slide. So equality as a concept makes sense. But when you look at the practical implementation of equality, it may not deliver the desired, it may not have the desired effect that you have in mind. So when you look at this picture here, in the context of equality, we're giving everybody access to the same thing, which is one box each. But the shortest person cannot. The equal treatment still does not facilitate the requirements that the shortest person has. Does that make sense? And here, Jyoti, about justice, I've just mentioned that sometimes removing systemic barriers is not just about the individual person or persons. It might be a societal thing that you have very little control over. So what you can control is how you cater to all your students' requirements. So going back to this, each student has their own background. Their ages differ, their gender, ethnicity, educational attainment, educational abilities. Let's take, for example, the student I was talking about. somebody who travels a couple of hours from Jagi Road using the Kolong Express, coming into Guwahati, and then traveling from Guwahati railway station or wherever their last stop is to, get to a face-to-face college, will have different requirements from somebody who lives in Satribari and comes into Commerce College. Potentially will have different requirements. And to actually Sanjukta, I take your point that equity may come across as partiality, but the reality is that if we just focus on equality, what we will end up with is still having people who are disadvantaged. Ruben, involving students might not seem to be a problem if interesting and easily accessible. I agree. How do we market the online delivery teaching among students apart from one mandatory attendance scheme? And I can, if you bear with me, I'll be talking about the different models that you could use. But coming back to equality and equity and understanding the student's context. When I was preparing for this seminar, I found this particular picture on Facebook. It was just coincidence, but I thought it brings home a lot of the points that colleagues on the webinar are already making about. I'm just going back to some. So Dr. Deepjyoti Dekar, you've mentioned that, is it possible for online teaching to replace classroom teaching in a state like ours where many students don't have access to the smartphones and also due to poor connectivity? Absolutely right. So, but how do you, if the institutional or if the whole world is moving towards online delivery, how do you cater to those students who don't have access to those, to either connectivity or devices? How do you cater to that? That's your biggest challenge. And I might actually park this with and I'm not trying to shirk responsibility, but the reality is that this is something which is a systemic issue that governments need to resolve. And colleges like K.C.Das and other colleges can lobby the government for these issues to be resolved. If we do indeed need to move towards a more online delivery model, we need to cater to the most disadvantaged student. And these two students who are depicted in this picture are very right to oppose online teaching, because they are basically because one of the challenges that that this brings out is that if you move to online teaching and do not cater to the requirements of the most needy students, and by that I mean people who don't have access to, or people who struggle with online learning, people who do not have access to devices, connectivity, you will find a situation where there will be a lot of college dropouts just because they can't access the content. And this, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for. This is something that needs to be considered in the mix, in the thinking around the move to online learning. I mean, even in the UK, this is a problem, where we have some students who live in a village where, believe it or not, even in the UK, there are villages where there's very little online connectivity. And fortunately for those students, local governments have libraries where they have a broadband connection which is free to use for students. And maybe in our state, in Assam, in India, we need to start thinking about how we make those kinds of things available as well. I'll move on and talk about using technology to support learning. So these are the different bits of technology that you can consider using in your context to think about how you want to deliver learning. So the first thing being, starting from the left, right-hand side. So you can use video and audio assets simply on their own on a website to start your virtual learning environment. But most people who do the online learning well have some sort of a content publishing approach where they incorporate text, video, audio, and all the other collaboration tools, as well as assessment tools in their virtual learning environment, which caters to both traditional laptops, desktops, those kinds of devices, but also to mobile devices. An example could be, let's say, a MOOC. Has just a show of hands, how many people here have heard about MOOCs? Okay, I've got 2 people. Any more? Okay. So MOOCs are massive open online courses which cater to sometimes over 100,000 students. They're open because there's no registration criteria. The cohorts aren't local, they are diverse, dispersed all across the world. They are usually self-paced, so self-regulated, learners self-regulate. They may or may not have start and end dates. They are sometimes used towards college credits in the United States. The role of the instructor is more of a facilitator rather than the traditional teacher. MOOCs help students learn by the formation of learning communities. And then the assignments are scripted, and feedback is also scripted. Most of these MOOCs are free. It's open content and allows for real-time interaction. But there are 2 types of MOOCs, XMOOCs and CMOOCs. So what's an XMOOC? An XMOOC usually uses a traditional approach to learning where the teacher is videotaped. So the classes the teacher is doing in a face-to-face environment is simply videotaped and put online alongside automated texts. But this model is focused on knowledge transfer and duplication. And the underlying pedagogic approach is around behaviorism. The most successful MOOCs are based on connectivist principles. They use social constructivism and connectivism as the pedagogic approaches, which promote learners to self-regulate, self-organize, participate in collaborative activities, including content creation and content aggregation, as well as peer evaluation. And these kinds of MOOCs help students generate their knowledge through collaborative activities. So we've got a few raised hands. Is there anyone wanting to ask a question? Okay, I'll move on. So what can we learn from MOOCs themselves? The key thing that we can learn is that MOOCs use learning outcomes to deliver the learning. They situate the learner, so it's experiential learning, situating the learner in simulations, taking case-based approaches, problem-based approaches, or project-based approaches, which empower the learner to self-regulate using their own initiative, time, and working with other students to resolve problems, as a result of which they generate the knowledge. These MOOCs, what we can learn is collaborative learning works, and how to make collaborative learning work is you can use MOOCs as examples, especially CMOOCs, which is the connectivist MOOCs, which enable you to think about how you can use collaborative activities to actually design learning outcomes around collaborative activities. The other thing that we can learn from MOOCs is that students can often learn from each other. So promoting peer support is one of the concepts that we might want to incorporate into, or you might want to incorporate into your professional practice. The other thing that works in MOOCs is that MOOCs propagate the formation of interest groups. And so students become part of these interest groups, and where each student member of these interest groups has a role, which then creates going back to Ruben's question about engagement, using self-interest groups as a method of teaching might be a way to get students to engage. Using problem-based approach, where you're asking 10 students to work on a problem and resolve the problem by identifying the knowledge that they need to resolve the problem, might be another way of engaging students. And the role of the teacher changes from being the person who's imparting the knowledge to actually being the person who's a point of reference, who is an expert in the field, and who has a point of reference. I'm not familiar with Swayam. So, Madam Barua, I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar with Swayam, so I'm not going to be able to comment whether they're examples of MOOCs or not. I can definitely take that question away and come back to you outside this forum. Would that be okay? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Deep Jyoti, for confirming that. I will look into Swayam because I wasn't aware of this. So that's. So the other type of learning model that I want to talk to you about is something that has been used in the University of South Africa for a number of years now, going back 10, 15 years now. They've been using mobile technology to teach English in rural South Africa because their students are diverse and dispersed. And they've used iPods, gaming consoles, PDAs, mobile phones, and now they're using smartphones to impart knowledge. Now, the reason why I haven't identified an individual project from the University of South Africa is because there's so many and they are so very innovative. I didn't know which one to focus on. So literally, if you were to Google the University of South Africa and mobile learning, you would get a lot of resources around how they have used mobile technology to teach English in not only South Africa, but also sub-Saharan Africa. So I've talked about the challenges and what you might need to think about. I've talked about why we need to understand the student's context and why potentially we need to strive towards equity rather than equality. I've talked about what different technologies are that are available to support learning. I must just say that I did not want to call out any one particular technology or technology provider because I didn't want to be seem to be endorsing any technology provider, so to speak. And finally, I've talked about different models of delivery, as in how MOOCs are delivered and how the University of South Africa delivers learning as well. But all these things might start to become almost a thought process or a toolkit for you to start thinking about how you want to deliver learning in your context, in your students' context. But perhaps thinking about using a framework to use these tools within, or use these tools and skills within, would be something that you might want to consider. And I'm just going to highlight the Community of Inquiry framework. The Community of Inquiry framework has its roots in scientific inquiry, and this goes back to 1902. The community of inquiry is defined as individuals who are involved in the process of empirical inquiry into problematic situations. The best way to explain it is the example of is the poem about the 6 blind men and the elephant, and actually this story is linked with Buddhism. It comes from Buddhism. So essentially the story is that 6 blind men encounter an elephant. Each of them has their own interpretation of the elephant. One of them, who's holding the trunk, thinks it's a snake. The one holding the elephant's ears thinks it's a carpet. The one holding the elephant's tusk thinks it's a spear. The one holding the elephant's leg thinks it's a tree. The one touching the elephant's body thinks it's a wall. And finally, the one holding the elephant's tail thinks it's a rope. All of them, in their microcosm, they might be correct, but when you look at the bigger picture, you might think they're correct, sorry. But when you look at the bigger picture, all of them are incorrect. It's only the collective, when you bring their collective opinions together, they might come close enough to discovering that what they have in front of them is an elephant. So that same thinking, the community of inquiry, has been applied by Garrison, Cleveland Innes, and Vaughan, and I have used most of this in my own research as well. They have articulated 3 types of presences that we need to think about if we want to use a community of inquiry framework in deploying our learning. So the first thing is the teaching presence, which is defined as the design, facilitation, and direction of cognitive processes, which is basically engagement, helping students engage with the goals and giving them direction for study. The next bit is the cognitive presence, which basically defined as the ability of the participants to form a community and then construct meaning through sustained communication. So basically what it boils down to is that we take into account that the student has agency and is intelligent. And thirdly is the social presence. The social presence is the context within which the students are going to communicate, but also links to their ability to communicate their ideas and themselves as real people. Teachers have a role to play in setting the setting the context within which they will learn, so the goals and direction, and helping regulate the learning. They also have a role to play in setting the climate. So they become the people who facilitate the learning and then support the discourse between students. So I'll give you an example of how this model translates in the context of the Open University. In the context of before that, the core guiding principles are for the community of inquiry is that we need to look at education as an outcome of participation in a teacher-led community of inquiry, and it is not knowledge transmission. So the teachers facilitate thinking, facilitate students to think and challenge the students. The key thing is that knowledge is a combination of disciplines, not just one discipline. So for example, if you're teaching accounting, you can't teach accounting in isolation, because accounting is arguably a mixture of science and potentially language and few other disciplines. Teachers act as facilitators and rather than being the authoritative sources of knowledge, and students are considered to be intelligent and people with agency. And finally, the education process is not information acquisition, so not commit and vomit, but actually understanding the relationship between the different principles. So in the Open University, how do we deliver teaching? So we've got two sets of people. The first set of people are the course team. These are the faculty members who are the experts on what to teach, including the discipline as well as the information or the standards for that discipline. Then we have colleagues in the learning design team. These people are experts on designing instruction, or they are the experts on how to deliver. These two teams combine to create content which is delivered through the learning environment as well as books. We also have tutors who, in a traditional sense, are the teachers who take direction from the learning that has been created by the course team and the learning design team and deliver the learning to the students. These tutors are facilitators of the content. They help explain the content to the students. They are the point of reference as a point of expertise for the student. And finally, we have the student support team that support the student around administrative issues rather than teaching related issues. In the context of the community of inquiry, I can now explain how the Open University uses the community of inquiry. The teaching presence is around the course teams and the learning design experts combining to develop the content, which enables them to provide direction and goals. The cognitive presence is in the form of the content that is available on the VLE, the virtual learning environment, as well as the books, and also by in the context of the tutorials that the tutors run. The social presence is facilitated by the use of technology in terms of the virtual learning tools like forums, wikis, group activities, which are designed into the entire learning journey. So this is my last slide. Just want to bring together the things that we've just talked about. So the first and foremost, we need to be starting to think about how we improve our communication skills, improve the technological literacy, not only of the teachers, but also of the students, and potentially think about the technological platforms that you might be using in the context of the organization that you're working with. So Dr. Barua, this is, I'm speaking directly to you in terms of for K.C.Das College. You might want to think about what is the platform, technological platform that you want your teachers to use. Next, we think about how we develop assessment and evaluation skills for online delivery. Next to, we think about we need to think about how you need 3 times or 4 times more compassion, empathy, and patience that you already have. Think about yourself as a subject matter expert, not potentially acknowledge the fact that you may not be the expert in delivering learning online. Consider time management. Probably my time management has gone out the window today. Instructional design skills. Consider the need to develop skills on how to deliver the content online. This is absolutely necessary to make sure that the teaching is right from the start. Balance your adding your personality to the learning. Think about your student with the most difficult requirements when you're developing the content. If you do decide that online delivery is the approach, then you need to think about those students who don't have access to online learning and how you would make the learning available to them. At the Open University, we have those kinds of students as well, and we cater to them by making available alternative formats. So the teaching is done in alternative formats. You are the expert in terms of who your learner is. You need to understand your learner's requirements and consider your learner's requirements when you're designing your content for online delivery. I just want to say that the reason why I haven't given you a formula is because there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all. And at the end of the day, you are the expert who will determine how to deliver in the context of your learners. I've talked about avoiding the expert's blind spot because this particular thing gets exacerbated in an online environment. We've talked about considering being equitable rather than striving for equality because equality has practical issues. Consider this, that all 78 of you are on this journey together. So you need to learn from each other. So think about developing a community of practice where you not only share successes, but also share failures. And very importantly, do not be afraid to fail, because unless you try something, you're not going to be able to know whether it works or not. And the fact that, the more you try, the more likely you are to succeed. Learn from other practitioners. So you've had me come and speak to you, but reach out to people across disciplines. Reach out to people using the online media. So looking at, just simply researching the experts in online delivery and then thinking about how to incorporate that into your practice. And finally, don't be afraid to ask for help, because most of you have said that you're feeling demotivated by the switch to online delivery. The reality is that teaching online is hard. So you're not wrong in feeling demotivated, but it's about then how you incorporate the stuff that I have talked about and the stuff that you learn around online learning into your own practice, and use that as a practitioner in your own student's context. That is the key. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. And I apologize if I've gone over the time limit.
Okay, thank you, Avinash, for your wonderful presentation. So now we can proceed to the question answer session. I would once again request our participants to type their questions in the chat box, or you can also use the raise hand option to ask questions. Yes, we can proceed.
I just wanted to also say that, just to confirm that if you if anybody wants the slides, I'm happy to send it to you through Anjita ma'am. I'll send it to you shortly after this session.
Learning, you have talked about the pedagogy, but how to integrate with the content?
Well, any questions? Participants, feel free to say raise your hand or type the question in the chat box.
Well, Anjita, madam.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think the explanations were so lucid that people understood everything almost, right? And it has been a great learning experience, learning journey for all. Yeah, I would also like to know, have a few words from Mr. Barua with regard to integrating this contents with pedagogy. In the online platform, as it is known to all of us that teaching in online platform is really a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully through this, through what I have said, I've been able to. The message what I wanted to give you was that it's not just about what to teach, how to teach, but you also need to think about the framework within which you're teaching. So the individual goals for each session need to have some sort of a framework behind it. So for example, if you're teaching accountancy, you're starting with the basics, but you have the long-term goal in mind that I want the student to be able to create the balance sheet. One of the ways that you could use collaborative learning is that you just throw them into the deep end and say, right, today on day one, you say, by the end of this, not this session, but let's say you have a series of sessions, say for a month. By the end of this month, you will be able to create balance sheets for the company. But you give them a project or a case to work from without, and then the agency of the learner comes into place, where you're asking the learner to go and find out what content or what principles or what concepts they need to understand. And then as the teacher, all you're doing then is helping them understand the concepts rather than even introducing the concepts, because they've done the research for themselves about, okay, in order for me to understand balance sheets, I need to first learn maths. Okay, if I know maths, what are the other concepts that I need to know? I need to know ledger accounting. I need to know, journal accounting. So then you start thinking about, so then get the students to come to you and say, ma'am, the first thing that we need to learn is journal accounting. Can you please teach us that? So it's a slightly different way of approaching the learning itself, because you're making the learner self-regulate. Does that, I mean, I'm just using that as an example.
Themselves.
Sorry?
Basically, you are devising ways to engage the students themselves in their pursuit to learn something, the objective. Self-learning.
Absolutely, because one of the things that in the webinar tomorrow I'm going to be talking about is the need for constant learning and the need for learning even after you've left university. So when I'm talking to the students, and from my perspective, at least at the Open University, what we strive to do is create independent learners by the time they are graduates. So it's almost thinking about how we create those independent learners. So for a first year, putting them into a situation where you're giving them a project that by the end of the project they have to create a balance sheet. It might be very demotivating for a first year student, but for a second year or third year student, it might be a better approach to take. Does that make sense?
Of course.
I think Dr. Deepjuti Dekha has, yeah, he wants to ask a question. He can go ahead. So if we don't have any queries, any further queries, we can wrap up with the vote of thanks. Avinash, would you like to share something, anything else that you would like to share with the participants?
No, just to share that if there are any questions for later, what I've discussed with Anjita ma'am is that we're happy to field any questions outside this webinar. If you just email it to or send it to the WhatsApp group, is that correct?
Okay. So if the participant, yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd just like to share with Mr. Barua that what we have been doing as an institution.
Sure.
It has been a very learning experience for all of us, and within a couple of months, we did really try something because we were totally conventional, chalk and talk, along with some PPTs and other modes of disseminating education. But then,
yes.
As of now, we have our own self-developed app. We have our own college app, which we have self-developed. And all our teachers, they have all really worked hard to develop resource materials, and we have been disseminating all those resource materials through the app.
Okay.
We have also tried to interact with the students through different platforms. And in this journey, in this short journey, what I have experienced is that managing the motivation of the students as well as teachers is also a very, Herculean task, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what you could feel right from the poll which you have, just a little while bit taken the poll, right? Like what you feel, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that has been some experiences for me as well as for us as an institution. And then we have also developed one online examination module.
Okay.
Right. So in this journey of ours, it has been a very nice experience for us, all of us, to interact with you. I would like you to have some say as and when we ask something from you, because we will be needing your inputs to develop our system, and I hope you will be there with us.
I'm happy to help, Dr. Barua.
Yeah, because we'll be experimenting with this online exam module in a few days from now on. And with regard to assessment and evaluation, I would like to have some inputs from you in due course of time.
Absolutely. And if I'm not the right person to provide those inputs, I'll try and get you the right person as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah,
and
Madam
thanks
Bora.
again for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Well, before we wrap up with the vote of thanks, just I'd like to share a few things with our participants. Please submit your valuable feedback by visiting our college website, following the login form available in the webinar button. Feedback submission will be available only for today. You have to remember that. To download the participation certificate, you have to again log in using the webinar button after 2 days. A copy of the certificate will also be provided, will be emailed to the participants. But please remember that the certificates will be provided only to those participants who have submitted their feedback. So now I would like to call upon Dr. Runjun Phukan, Coordinator IQAC, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Please unmute, madam.
Runjun Baidu, please unmute yourself. You are unmuted. You can go ahead.
No, she is muted again once again.
Runjun Baidu? Runjun Baidu, you can go ahead.
She is already speaking. Probably her headphone is interfering with her voice. Yeah.
So,
No, she is speaking. Oh, yes. I think that's a technical snag, Madam Anjita Bora.
yes, sir.
That's a technical.
But I think the technical glitch is on her end, sir.
Okay, okay.
Has she finished? So, should we carry on, sir?
Yeah, I think we should carry on with an audible vote of thanks. So I just request you to take over and give a formal vote of thanks, since we have a technical glitch on Madam
So,
Dr.
I take the privilege of offering the vote of thanks. At the
Yes.
very outset, I'd like to thank our esteemed speaker, Mr. Avinash Barua, for his wonderful presentation. It was indeed very informative, very thought-provoking. Thank you, Avinash, for sparing your valuable time and giving a very wonderful presentation. And being an alumni, we are proud of you. We would be looking forward for such presentations in the near future. Next, I would like to extend my vote of thanks to our principal, Dr. Rishikesh Barua, for being a constant source of motivation for us. Without his support and cooperation, we wouldn't have been successful in executing the programs. Thank you, sir. I'd also take the opportunity of thanking all the participants who have joined this webinar. Thank you. And I would also like to thank my colleagues for their support and cooperation. At the back end, there are many colleagues who have been there are a few colleagues who have been working to make this webinar a success. I extend my vote of thanks to them too. Last but not the least, I would like to thank each and everyone who has been directly or indirectly involved in organizing the webinar and making it successful. Thank you so much. I thank you once again for your active participation. We can wind up now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Julie.